In these uncertain economic times, it's easy to be worried about protecting your wealth, your hard-earned savings, and your family's financial future. Plunging interest rates, the devaluating dollar, and political unrest constantly threaten what you have worked hard to earn and all that you own. That's why now it's more important than ever to protect your assets and have the money you need to make your dreams come true. Welcome to the Global Wealth Fortress Report with successful global entrepreneur and wealth preservation expert Joel Nagel. Joel's helped thousands of people just like you protect what you have so that you can make even more and make your every dream come true. So, sit back and enjoy Joel Nagel's offshore expert advice on how you can live the good life at a great price, where the sun never sets on your financial fortress.
Hi, this is the Offshore Club's Carib Carter Clues, and welcome to Joel Nagel's Global Wealth Fortress Report. Today, we're going to talk about the topic that's on everybody's mind because it's crushing inflation through the ceiling. Joel, what in the heck are you telling your clients how to protect their assets against this is hyperinflation? It's mind-boggling.
Well, good morning, Carter, and happy Holy Week to you and all
Thank
the
you.
production team here. It's it's a joyous time of the year on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's a lot going on in the world. You've got war, and the current administration is blaming that war for inflation. I think that's a fallacy, as we all know. The other day, I saw some YouTube video about a bird pooping on the president, and said even the birds aren't buying this.
Even the birds are expressing their opinion about these blatant lies. Yeah.
And then I read later it wasn't really a bird; it was a feather or something. I don't know if it was true or not. But the point is that we're in a really tough situation, and I mean, even months ago when they were talking about being transitory, this is just this temporary and inflation caused by supply chain, sort of leftover from COVID. It's just rubbish. I mean, I saw a statistic the other day, and it was something like 80% of all dollars ever printed in the history of the United States, 250 years, have been printed in the last 2 years. I mean, think about that.
Oh, Joe, it's stunning. And they don't expect that to inflate anything. The transitory thing, if you remember, if I can real quickly, here was the progression. When the inflation first started after Biden destroyed our energy independence with the stroke of a pen, Powell and Biden said, no, there's nothing to say here. Then when it just kept up, then they did the transitory lie. Oh, okay. But it's transitory. That was at 4%. Then when it got up to over 5%, the next statement was, I remember these so distinctly. Look, you people out there, you don't understand what's going on. We've got this under control. Now it's at 8.5%, 40-year record. By the way, this morning, Joel, they released the producer index. It's up 11.2%. The highest in the history of the country. Yeah. So this ain't now because now they're saying, oh, it's just temporary again.
And even those numbers, Carter, we know they have so many ways of cooking those numbers and making them, keeping them lower. Ask any, not to sound sexist, but any housewife or anybody that goes to the grocery store regularly. This week we're shopping for food for Easter, and it's just it's insane. I mean, anything decent you want to buy, a ham, a turkey, some kind of nice meat to serve for Easter for your family. I mean, it's up 100%, easy.
Absolutely.
Some cases 200%. And, so it's scary. I mean, I think elderly people got the first cost of living adjustment in years, this immediate past year, and it was 3% or something. I mean, it's a joke. So,
so far the government admits they've lost 5.5%, But Joel, look at this. You mentioned last week, John Williams over at Shadow Stats. They're the real figures. It's a 20%.
Yeah,
20%.
If you'd asked me, I would have said, official inflation has to be 20, 25% easy. I mean,
Easily.
People see it, they feel it, whatever it is you're buying, clothes, a car, the reason the official government statistics are lower is because they have this little nuance that if you can substitute a like kind good for the same good, then it's not considered to be inflation. So, if you go back over the last 20 years, 20 years ago, you bought a filet mignon for $5, and then you could buy a pound, and then eventually you could buy a hamburger for $5 a pound. And now you can go, and then you could buy hot dogs for $5 for a package. And now you can buy a can of Spam for $5. And in the government view, that means there's zero inflation. But we all know that what that really means is, with the same amount of money, you are living a lower and lower and lower quality of life. And meanwhile, inflation is pushing people's incomes, marginally higher. But, with higher wages, you're paying more taxes, right?
Yeah.
So, you take away a big chunk of, I've had clients tell me, wow, I got a little bit more money. It pushed me into a higher tax bracket. So now I'm paying more taxes, and, whatever gain I thought I had is gone because of the cost of living. So, it's just this circular thing that's really hurting everyone. I think the blue collar folks in particular who, voted in mass for the current administration are now asking themselves, hey, what did we do? I mean, inflation is a hidden tax on everyone, but it's regressive. Unlike income tax, which is progressive, meaning the more you make, the more you pay, which is our tax system. Inflation is regressive because it affects people with the least money the most. So, when you all of a sudden can't afford, now you have to start skipping, a meal here and there. Maybe elderly people have to decide whether they're going to buy their medications or buy food. I mean, that's a horrendous choice that no elderly person should ever have to make. The real problem is that, we're sort of sitting here today bashing the Democrats and the current administration, but if the truth be told, the right side of the aisle hasn't done much better, particularly when it comes to printing money. That's the easy way to paper over other problems. But, eventually it comes home to roost. And now we're seeing that you have all of this tide of money chasing, goods that have actually gone down in terms of their volume. So go buy a car. You're not going to get any deals, right? No. You're lucky if you can buy a car at, at Sticker. Go buy a house. People are needing to bid 10, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 over the asking price to get the house. I mean, anything that has real value is going to shoot up because, there's I think it's called Graham's law that says, when you have multiple things of value, you're always going to trade away the one that you perceive as having the least value. So right now, the thing that has the least value is the dollar in your wallet. And, it's kind of like going back to Germany in the 1920s, where the joke was you go to the bakery to buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of Reichsmarks, and the baker would say, well, dump out the Reichsmarks. I don't want those, but I'll take your wheelbarrow, right? Because the wheelbarrow had value and the Reichsmarks didn't. And, we're not quite there yet, but, like my friend there. Yeah, my friend Igor von Greiritz, who's he's one of the top people in the world who comments on gold. He likes to say all the time that, politicians think they can walk this tightrope, but, mild inflation turns into severe inflation, turns into hyperinflation overnight. And it feels like we're on the edge of true hyperinflation. When you have, inflation going up at 8%, in a month, well, you're on pace for 100%. And to go from 100% inflation to 1,000% inflation it's not far behind. So what that really means, this is a long-winded answer, but you started by saying, what am I telling our clients? Yep. The least valuable asset you have right now is your dollars. So you got to get rid of your dollars, whatever. Get rid of the dollars. We can talk about things you can convert them for. But whatever it is, even if it's wheelbarrows, it's more valuable than your dollars. You know,
It's just
if you have
that's a
nice,
great
you know,
observation. That's a great observation. I'm glad, and I want to get back to the specific recommendations, but I'm glad you mentioned it's the Democrats and Republicans. We know today, or maybe it was yesterday, Biden announced he was going to resolve the gas prices being up 100% by allowing 5% more ethanol. Right now, both Iowa senators said this is wonderful. Of course, folks, ethanol is made of corn, and they have a lot of farmers.
one's Republican, one's Democrat, right?
Yeah, and so, but step back and say, okay, 2 weeks ago, Biden told us we're going to face terrible food shortages. So now he's saying, let's take the food and turn it into gasoline. Joel, it's insanity.
It is, honestly. These guys really don't have a clue. I mean, you watch and see 3 months from now, they'll be talking about massive corn shortages, and, you know, you're going to pay 3 times more for corn at the grocery store. It's, you know, it's a cause and effect. And if you don't understand economics 101, then you can't really deal with the issue or the problem. And that's just it. I mean, they've kind of brainwashed even high level economists, you know, into this Keynesian idea that, you know, everything can be addressed through money printing. But, you know, eventually you'll come to the point where people won't want the money. They'll say, I'll give you my good, my service, but this is what I want in exchange. We had a conference last year, and one of our keynote speakers said, yeah, I'll come to your conference. I want 10 1-ounce gold coins and a business class round trip ticket to get to the conference and back. He didn't want to quote his services in dollars. And, you know, you're seeing other people saying that about Bitcoin, Ethereum, silver, real estate, you know, whatever it is, people are more interested in having the alternative at this point. And I think that's only going to continue.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those two specifically. There was just an article, you know, Doug Casey, you probably know him personally. I mean, I've always found him pretty sharp. He has a writer named Jeff Thomas, who's an economist. And he said exactly, he just had an article. I just pulled it out in front of me. He says, the only way to fight this inflation, in his opinion, and you've already referenced it, basic truth number one, go for precious metals and real estate, which will be the last safe investments for the retention of wealth. What do you think of that?
Well, it's absolutely true. I mean, if you look, for example, at an economy that has been completely broken and destroyed, like Argentina, you know, if you go back up until 2000, the Argentine peso and the dollar were pegged 1-to-1. If you go back 100 years before that to 1900, the per capita income of Argentina was 30% higher than the United States. So, you know, you're talking about a wealthy country, that has agriculture, and it has minerals and oil and gas, and it has everything that a country could want. But, you know, they had, a terrible way of dealing with their money. Historically, every 10 or 15 years, they'd have a major currency crisis. And 2000 began the beginning of uncoupling of the peso to the dollar. So it went overnight from 1-to-1 to 3-to-1, and then, 5-to-1 and 10-to-1. And now it's, 80-to-1, something like that. I haven't checked it recently, but it's 80 on its way to 100-to-1. But if you are an Argentine who owns gold or real estate, you are largely insulated from that, because, if you're selling an apartment in Buenos Aires, you're going to quote the price. You might accept the Argentine peso for payment, but you are going to set the price in, dollars, gold equivalents, or whatever. Now, interestingly, another quick example, everybody is focusing on the atrocities of Russia and Ukraine right now. But a lot of people think that Putin has a much bigger design than just what's going on in Ukraine. Yep. And, Zero Hedge put out a fantastic article the other day. I would recommend it to anyone. And it starts out talking about, the ruble, but it's really Putin is attacking the dollar as the world reserve currency. So the ruble started to fall pretty rapidly when the war started, when all the sanctions hit in. And one commentator, Jim Rickards, said Putin is a master of jujitsu, and he understands that the way to fight back is to use the force and energy of your opponent. So when we put the sanctions on Russia, one of the things we exempted was oil and gas. Why? Because Western Europe needs oil and gas. So Putin said, okay, fine. You have all these sanctions on us, except for oil and gas. We're going to continue to sell you oil and gas, but we're not going to accept dollars. You have to pay us in rubles.
That's it.
So what happens? You had to take your dollars or your euros to the central bank of Russia and exchange them. So what did that do? It started slowly propping up the Russian ruble, and now the ruble's all the way back to its value before. It had fallen almost 50%. It's worked its way back, and it's getting stronger. And they're going to require any country that they feel is not a friend, they're going to require payment in rubles, gold, Bitcoin. They're accepting those types of currencies. So a lot of people think Russia and China have this all worked out, that we're going to, they call it Bretton III, which refers to Bretton Woods, the global, system that we've been under since Nixon took us off the gold standard back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to end up with is, a currency, a ruble and a renminbi, the Chinese currency, are going to be commodity backed or gold backed. And they're going to require, when you purchase things from them, that we have to convert our currency into their currency. And that will knock the dollar off of its perch. And eventually, whether it's now or in 3 years or 5 years, I don't have a crystal ball. But, even if we win this short-term war in Ukraine, and the dollar's actually been strengthening in Europe, because remember, Europe has no natural resources. I mean, they don't have oil or gas. They're either importing it from Russia, they're importing it from us, but they're in even a worse position we are. So you're seeing the dollar rally against some currencies, but I think the long-term effect is going to be to remove the dollar as the world reserve currency. And when that happens, the inflation we're seeing now will be just the start, because everything will be quoted globally in a price that's not the dollar. And, and you'll have to convert your hard-earned dollars to get somebody else's currency at a premium to be able to buy whatever you want. So yes, I agree with you. Taking us off, energy independence is huge. And, again, I think, the political forces there are completely, incompetent. Why we're trying to help other countries with their borders and with their oil and gas supplies, when we should be focusing on those issues here in the U.S., Keystone Pipeline, things like that, making sure that we're energy independent. And we do have the capacity to export energy and help Europe. And, we can't do that because there's so many restrictions and limitations on production of our own energy supply here in the U.S.
No, we can't. We can no longer export. We were an exporting energy nation when Biden took office. Now we're dependent again. And also the BRIC coalition. What is it? Brazil,
Russia, India, China.
India and China, all of them are doing exactly what you just said, moving away from the US dollar. And Saudi Arabia has now said they no longer feel compelled to abide by the agreement they struck, I think, with Nixon for the petrodollar, because they said, we don't feel like you're protecting us anymore. So that's very, very serious.
Well, that's the single biggest supportive element of our currency globally, because think about it. It doesn't matter if you're a Filipino, a Brazilian, a German. The deal for the last 50 years has been wherever you're from, it doesn't matter. But if you want to buy oil anywhere in the world, you have to buy it in dollars. So it didn't matter whether you're buying from the Russians, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Americans, the Canadians. It didn't matter. It was always in dollars because the Saudis said so.
Yes.
Because they control the price, the quantity of oil. So, that was the little arrangement that you're right, that Nixon made. And he understood when he took the dollar off the gold standard that there was literally nothing backing the dollar anymore. So they created this truly artificial demand for dollars, because why should any of those people have to convert their currency into dollars to buy oil?
Yeah, to buy
Can't
oil.
they just use their own currency? Or why can't they convert it into the currency of the Saudis? Why do they have to go through the dollar? So the dollar was this very artificial, and it replaced the gold standard. We got rid of gold, and we said and it was protected by the U.S. military, right? We said to the Saudis, we're going to protect you, come hell or high water. It doesn't matter what you do. If you kill journalists or whatever terrible things you do, it doesn't matter. The U.S. is always going to protect you. And you're right. Now they feel vulnerable because of the nuclear ambitions of the Iranians.
Yeah.
And when they say, okay, you can pay us in, half dozen other currencies besides the dollar, you will see that immediate daily demand for dollars by the rest of the world, just so they can buy oil. You'll see that disappear. And, we've created this massive supply, right? For the last couple of years, we've just been printing, but the world has been sucking up that supply. Well, what happens when the world doesn't suck up that supply? Those dollars are really, really going to go down a lot. I mean, it really, really, truly breaks my heart. And I wish other people could see it. I think there are politicians that they see it, but they just kick the can down the street and say, well, I'm worried about getting elected in a couple months or whatever. Nobody is really worried about the country, our children, our grandchildren, putting the country on a solid setting. So it's very, very problematic. And what I tell my clients is, look, you cannot look to a macro solution. The government is not going to solve this in a way that's good for you. They're not even going to solve it in a way that's good for the government or the country as a whole. So what you have to do as an individual is immediately look to seek ways to protect your purchasing power. And that's really what asset protection is all about. And I'm not an investment advisor, so I don't tell people, thou shalt do this, or
right.
gold's going up this week or whatever. What I find interesting is all these talking heads that are investment advisors, and usually when they tell you something, they get it wrong. I don't have to get it. I'm not going to tell you what gold is going to do next week. But if I said to you, Carter, chances are 30 years from now, gold's going to be a lot higher than it is now. Gold's $2,000 an ounce. You think it's possible it could be 10,000 or 20,000 an ounce? You're going to probably say, well, I'm not going to disagree with you, Joel. And if I said, what about it goes the other way? The dollar strengthens and gold is only worth $50 an ounce, like it was, back 50 years ago. Are you buying that? You'd be like, nah, I'm not buying that. So my job as an asset protection lawyer is actually way easier than the investment advisor, because I'm not trying to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm just telling you what's going to happen over generations. And people with money, that's what they want to know. They want to know, how do I protect my money for generations? But now the problem's gotten a lot worse because of the way we started the show talking about inflation. People are worried about, well, what about just my retirement that I'm 3 years away from? I built up this little nest egg to support myself, and it's not going to support me anymore.
No, it's just it's horrifying. People are watching the dollar. The dollar's descent is it's stunning. The fact of the matter is, what you had to live on a year ago will no longer support you. So you are exactly right. Those on fixed retirement incomes, every single day, they are able to, I was going to say, not live as well. Look, they're in danger of not being survivability, Joel. You nailed it. You nailed it. We're almost out of time. Let me ask you one more question. In this article that I referenced by Jeff Thomas over there at Doug Casey's office, he said that he recommends offshore property investment and finding countries that have the lowest possible property tax. What do you think of that? I mean, you are a man with tremendous offshore investments.
Yeah, I agree with both of those statements, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, by the way. Austria, for example, where I live, they do not have property taxes. Austria is an expensive country to live in, but it's all income tax based. But the beauty of no property taxes is that elderly people are not kicked out of their homes because they can't afford to pay property taxes.
Yep.
So we don't have that phenomenon. In Austria, when you're in your peak earning years, you pay the highest tax. And when you're in retirement, you have low or little or no taxes. So, the system is designed that way. Now, when you talk about low cost of living, we're talking mostly for North Americans, we're talking about Central and South America.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, it's really just a developmental thing. Those countries are much further behind on the developmental curve. Everything is in relationship to dollars for the most part. Not every country, but most countries are pro-American. They are pro-dollars. You're going to be able to stretch those dollars a lot further. I mean, if you live in a country like, let's say, Nicaragua or Panama, you live in one of those type of countries, Ecuador, and you make $2,000 a month in Social Security, you're living pretty well, actually. And what we've seen is, as inflation has come, even in those countries, the dollar has actually also increased in value compared to those currencies. So inflation maybe is up 10%, but the dollar, the dollar exchange rate in many cases is up that much or even more. In the case of Colombia, for example, the Colombian peso, there's an extreme increase in the dollar. So it's allowing people to go there and maintain a quality of life. For some of those people, the time to save and invest is over. If you're 75 years old and on a fixed pension, you're probably not able to really think in terms of asset protection, buying gold or whatever, Bitcoin, or making strategic investments. So now you have to focus on the cost side of the equation. And in these countries, the cost is so much lower that you are getting a bump. And we're seeing a lot of people. I can't remember the latest statistic, but well over 1 million American retirees now get their Social Security checks outside of the United States. Excellent. And that's really what's happening. In some cases, they want to go because of weather and maybe going to their cultural roots or whatever. They maybe are deciding on their own. But we're seeing more and more people kind of go because they quasi have to, meaning if they want to maintain any kind of decent quality of life, that's the only way they can do it. Places like South Florida, Southern California, South Texas, this sort of Sun Belt where a lot of Americans would go historically in their retirement years. The Carolinas, they've just gotten so expensive that people just can't afford to be there.
Out of sight. And you have what I call the 10% solution. You and I have talked about it before. Your home, even in some of the finest residential resort communities like Grand Pacifica and Grand Bayman, 10% of what it would cost for the same type home in the U.S. So it's just, I'm glad you gave that advice. I think it's great advice, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I had a client just the other day said, look, he sold his little home in the suburbs of Detroit. It was a cookie cutter home. Got $750,000 for it. Got more than what he put it on the market for, and he was going to spend like $200,000 on a home in Nicaragua that was nicer than the home he left. And the $500,000 difference is literally his retirement nest egg for the rest of his life. So that's really how he was able to finance his retirement, by cashing out of overinflated property, buying something in a place where it's more economical, where he had a higher quality of life for less money. I know you love talking about that. It's really true. I mean, I think the typical American doesn't see it. But it doesn't take much, take a trip, go see for yourself. I'm not making this up, right? And you're not making this up. I know you spend a lot of time in Honduras, and you could probably talk all day about that topic, but you really can live a higher quality of life for less money. And, until the economic system completely crashes, you're going to be better off in those types of countries than you are in the US. Even still, I would recommend, if you can, you still want to try to convert a little bit of money out of dollars into something else, whatever that something else is. We've talked about that a lot on this show. I'm sure we'll talk about it some more, but it's going out of the least desirable asset, paper money, into something more valuable, whether it's silver, gold, real estate, Bitcoin, something that the government just can't print. That's what we're really looking for.
Joe, that's excellent. You've given us, once again, great advice, great asset protection advice, inflation asset protection advice at a time when we need it most. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. This is
Thank you,
tremendous.
Carter.
Tremendous.
Appreciate it. And I wish you and your family a really happy Easter. And
thank you.
See you next week.
See you next week. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Appreciate it. There you go, folks. That is the best inflation anti-inflation asset protection advice you can possibly get from America's #1 asset protection attorney. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of it. And I like the idea of making that move south and living the good life at a great price south of the border. So once again, thank you for joining us. Let's do this thing.